Okay, it's the wrap up of the KPFT 50th anniversary visit. Frank Martin here with Igor Alexander. I think it was Bob Rogers, the general manager, that brought me in, that he felt that the Pacifica stations were the Marxist station in Berkeley, the Leninist in KPFK in Los Angeles, KPFA, the Marxist in Berkeley, the Trotskyites in New York at WBAI, and we were always the anarchists at KPFT in Houston, as they are to this day, playing music. And I don't know what Washington, D.C. was. Does that make sense to you?
It does, actually, because I had grown up in the San Francisco Bay Area and had listened to KPFA, KPFB quite a lot, and it was a very high-minded kind of enterprise. You had people from the various universities, certainly right down the street. There was the University of California at Berkeley, which had, I believe, at the time I was in high school, something like 14 Nobel Prize winners on the faculty. And so people would have these very serious discussions about the current economic crisis in Sierra Leone and that sort of thing. And here in Texas, when I started working at KPFT, I realized that the local population of people who were interested in non-commercial radio were not people who wanted to discuss the current economic crisis in Sierra Leone, but they simply wanted to sort of, I don't know, kick out the traces, as they used to say, uh, and confront a kind of I don't know, a traditional culture here in Texas that was
That's right, yes.
that was uh, apart from being robust in its economy, extremely robust in its economic aspects. It was not a place that placed a high value on culture of any sort. I mean, one of the things I remember early on, just moving to Houston, was a woman telling me that, well, she had a son who had graduated from university and had uh, taken some interesting jobs somewhere. And she said that he was a member of Mensa, the High IQ Society, but she says, but you'd never know it to talk to him. And that was a kind of charming Texas modesty. People didn't want to show off their intellectual bona fides the way they would in Berkeley. And certainly when I moved to Manhattan in New York, showing off your intellectual bona fides was pretty much a around the clock job. So it was very interesting to see people that were kind of instinctive anarchists, I would say. They didn't read Prince Kropotkin or any of the great theorists of anarchic government, or I guess anarchy would be a lack of government. Anyway, they just sort of had an instinct that people, little people needed to get a fair shake, that uh, music was liberating, music was culture. In Berkeley, KPFA, KPFB did not really play a lot of music. And so it was intriguing here that music really was actually a kind of revolutionary material in its own right. And also the people were had such interesting backgrounds compared to the sort of children of professors and whatnot that you saw in Northern California around KPFE and KPFB. You had people that actually were really not intellectuals at all, not particularly educated, but they loved radio and they were sort of delighted simply with the medium.
It continues to this day. When I got to Houston yesterday, it was music. It was the James Nagle's Blues Show today. It was uh, Zydeco blues, sort of a country flavored bluegrass thing. Uh, and it's always been music on KPFT in Houston. It certainly makes it an easier sell than people talking about how Marxism is the important wave of the future and how we can get a Marxist government in California, which they're doing still to this day. I was in San Francisco last month, and KPFA is the same thing. Anyway, it's been 50 years of this. Uh, it's amazing that it's still here in Houston. Houston seems to be one of the healthier Pacifica stations after they're all trying to be towed underneath by the WBAI debacle and millions of debt to the Empire State Building. WBAI has moved 4 Times Square. Um, uh, Good luck. I hope they can. They're still on the air, and they're selling an awful lot of health food, pills, and products to try and pay the rent on all of the stations. Are they doing that here too? Do you know?
I really am not aware of
I
the
haven't heard it
current,
here.
no, the economic situation. I understand that there is currently a lien on the 419 Lovett
Ah,
Boulevard
right.
property that Michael August mentioned this afternoon. And the building had been donated to Pacifica, so how it ended up with the lien, I'm not sure.
Mortgage.
Yes, but in Texas, I don't know. I guess the law must have changed because it used to be, well, if you were a private person and you had paid off the mortgage on your home, you could not remortgage it. If you wanted the money from the house, you had to sell it. And that was an attempt by a much more populist legislature and governor's office in Texas, probably the end of the 19th century, or maybe during the Great Depression, to protect people from predatory banking practices. But somehow, in the shifting landscape, economic landscape, I know also Pacifica here in Houston owned their transmitter, and that was sold to somebody. Uh,
That's not uncommon. That iHeartRadio, Cumulus, all the big commercial, they all sell their transmitters and they lease them back to them from the other. This thing happens all the time. So for better or for worse, largely worse, of course.
yeah, I don't know. To me, that is always a bad idea, but
Yeah.
that's just my 19th century thinking. Uh, but Pacifica, I understand, like about 20 years ago, 30 years into the experiment, when streaming radio stations began to stream on the internet, one of the most popular stations in the world was KPFT because they had almost nothing but music programs at that point in time in the early 2000s. And people loved the incredible eclectic mix of music. You could hear things you couldn't hear in commercial stations, and it's certainly getting to be more and more that way. Ever since under President Reagan, you've had this attempt to allow really large capital structures to take over broadcasting, where it used to be you couldn't own more than 5 licenses, broadcast licenses for radio, or 5 broadcast licenses for television anywhere in the United States. You couldn't own multiple licenses in a single market. Under Reagan, that started to erode, and you ended up with people like Clear Channel Communications, who had started out as a company building and leasing billboards, buying up hundreds and hundreds of radio stations. You ended up with the Reverend, what's his name, Don something in Mississippi.
Not Jimmy Swaggart.
No, not Jimmy Swaggart, but this is a religious group out of Mississippi that buys up non-commercial licenses in rural areas. Right. So now, if you get in your car and start trying to find stations in the non-commercial end
It'll
of the,
just be a
F,
repeater. Yeah.
it will just be endless sort of fundamentalist Christian
Right. That's a
talk
lot of
radio.
the future of all of radio. The EMF group is a religious thing based in Sacramento, and they bought out WJLP in New York City. They bought out 98.7 in Los Angeles. Like an $8 million deal. It would have been a lot more a long time ago. But under this regime, what has happened that has caused the consolidation further is the studio city of license rule. You have to have an office and a studio in the city of license, and that went away about not quite a year ago. And but now in 2020, you don't have to have any presence in your city of license. For example, if you were in Barstow and you were covering like the highway stations between Los Angeles and Barstow, California, they used to have studios and they operated out of the Barstow station. That all dried up immediately, and they immediately moved everything to Las Vegas, and every little station that had a presence in a small town, it's all gone to some big computer in, a data center. So broadcasting as we know it, that helped put another nail in the coffin of things, and
Yeah.
that's the current president and regime, and Agent Pi that allowed that to happen. Anyway, we're going to run out of battery pretty soon, I imagine. Do you want to blow your whistle? What do you?
Well, I don't know. This is rather negative. This is an Aztec death whistle, and the Aztec warriors used to play them en masse to imitate the sound of souls in torment. I think
Okay.
I will blow it now and demonstrate to you what this sounds like. This used to scare the bejesus out of their enemies. Or if you blow it without the hand, the mute, you end up with this kind of ghostly wind sound. Of course, the Aztecs didn't smoke much. They could blow a long time.
All right, and that's our wrap up for March 1st, 2020, here at the 50th anniversary of Pacifica Radio KPFT 90.1 in Houston, Texas. Right, Igor?
Right. We're down, but not out.
And that's it.